A black woman CEO was kicked out of her own hotel. 5 minutes later, she fired the entire staff. Before we continue, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel as we dish out fresh, engaging stories daily. Enjoy the story. Serena James had always been a meticulous CEO, known for her hands-on approach and keen eye for detail. As the head of a luxury hotel chain, she had set the bar high for service and excellence. But lately, something was off. Complaints had been pouring in from guests, warning her about subpar service, poor management, and a growing lack of attention to the hotel's once glamorous standards. It was a constant hum in her ear, a reminder that not all was as it seemed behind the closed doors of her properties. She'd heard the rumors for weeks, but it wasn't until the complaints became impossible to ignore that she decided to take matters into her own hands. Serena, with her reputation built on a reputation of exacting standards, knew that she couldn't rely on secondhand accounts. No, she had to see the hotel with her own eyes. So, she made the decision. She would visit one of her flagship hotels, completely unannounced. The staff would have no idea she was coming, and she would discover the truth for herself. The car ride was filled with the quiet hum of anticipation. Serena glanced out the window, watching the familiar skyline pass by as her mind raced through the possibilities of what she might find. She had already prepared herself for disappointment, but she wasn't sure just how far it would go. She had worked too hard to build this brand, and she wasn't going to let anything or anyone bring it down. As she arrived at the hotel, Serena's eyes instinctively scanned the building. Everything appeared to be in place. The towering entrance with its sleek, glass doors, the polished floors, and the soft scent of luxury that lingered in the air. But something felt off. The atmosphere seemed dull. There was an absence of the usual hustle and bustle of staff greeting guests, of employees scurrying to ensure everything was perfect. Serena entered the lobby, her high heels clicking softly against the marble floor, cutting through the quiet that had settled over the space. Normally, the lobby was a buzzing hub. Guests checking in and out, staff attending to their needs, and a sense of organized chaos that made the place feel alive. Today, it was eerily quiet. The receptionist, a young woman with an indifferent expression, was talking animatedly to a colleague about her weekend plans. Serena stood there for a moment, waiting for the acknowledgement she had grown accustomed to. The warm smile, the friendly greeting, the welcoming assurance that she had arrived at a place that valued excellence. But that recognition never came. The receptionist continued talking, oblivious to Serena standing just a few feet away. No smile, no greeting, just a cold shoulder. Serena's brow furrowed. Had something happened? Was this just a one-off mistake? Perhaps the receptionist hadn't noticed her, lost in conversation. After all, people were only human. Serena cleared her throat, but the receptionist didn't look up. She tried again, this time more assertively. Still nothing. Serena could feel her patience beginning to wear thin. She had worked long hours to build this empire, poured countless hours into creating an impeccable brand, and now, in her own hotel, she was being treated like a stranger, a guest who didn't matter. "Excuse me," Serena said, her voice calm but firm. The receptionist glanced up briefly, then immediately returned to her conversation, dismissing Serena as if she were an inconvenience. The other staff members in the vicinity, who should have been hustling to serve guests, were either chatting in small groups or wandering about aimlessly, clearly not aware of what was happening. Serena took a deep breath, swallowing down the rising tide of frustration. She wasn't just a guest here. This was her hotel. It was her name on the sign outside. She had the right to expect basic respect. So, she approached the front desk, leaning slightly toward the receptionist, her presence undeniable now. "Can I speak with the manager?" Serena asked. The receptionist didn't look up, but nodded vaguely, her lips curling into an almost imperceptible frown as she reached for the phone. Serena's eyes remained locked on the receptionist, watching every motion, each moment of neglect stoking the fire of her frustration. She waited and waited. Minutes dragged on. Serena stood there, doing her best to remain composed, but inside, her patience was running thin. She could hear the staff members laughing softly in the background, as though this were just another mundane day at work. Her presence in the lobby clearly wasn't a surprise. There was no sense of urgency, no rush to meet her expectations. Serena's mind began to race. Was this what had been happening all along? Was this the level of neglect that guests had been complaining about? Was this just an isolated incident, or was this symptomatic of a larger issue? Finally, the receptionist looked up, barely making eye contact as she informed Serena that the manager was unavailable at the moment. Serena's grip tightened on her purse, her knuckles going white. Unavailable? She had been told the manager was there earlier in the day. It was clear that they were trying to avoid confrontation, to brush her off as if her concerns didn't matter. "I need to speak to someone in charge," Serena insisted, her voice rising slightly, enough to convey the seriousness of the situation. She was not going to be dismissed this time. She had built this brand with sweat and hard work, and she wasn't about to let it crumble from neglect. The receptionist, still uninterested, simply shrugged. "He's busy," she muttered, offering no further explanation. Serena's frustration simmered beneath the surface. She was not the type to back down, not when it came to her company, not when it came to the people who relied on her leadership. She wasn't going to let this slide. With a quiet but unmistakable authority, Serena demanded to speak with someone else. Anyone who could provide answers. She waited, the seconds ticking by in unbearable silence. The tension in the lobby grew thicker with every passing moment. Serena could sense the unease creeping into the staff as they realized she wasn't going to be so easily ignored. They shuffled around, whispering nervously to one another, the air thick with discomfort. And then, just as she was preparing to push the issue further, something unexpected happened. Security arrived. Without a word, 2 security officers stepped into the lobby, their expressions cold, their uniforms sharp and stiff. Serena looked up at them, momentarily taken aback by the suddenness of their arrival. She had expected some form of acknowledgement from the hotel management, some kind of answer to her question. But instead, she was being treated as though she was the problem. Serena James had always prided herself on her poise, her ability to remain calm under pressure, to maintain control even in the most trying situations. But as the security officers stepped forward, a wave of disbelief washed over her. She was not prepared for this. Not here. Not at her own hotel. The moment they arrived at the front desk, the officers moved with quiet efficiency, their uniforms crisp and their expressions emotionless. Without a single word exchanged, they simply gestured for Serena to follow. No explanation, no apology. Just the cold, silent command to leave. Serena's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to let the injustice show on her face. For a moment, it felt like the world around her slowed down, as if everything had shifted out of focus. The lobby, once bustling with life, now felt like a stage for her humiliation. Her mind raced as she processed the absurdity of the situation. "This can't be happening," she thought. "They're kicking me out of my own hotel. My hotel." But as the officers motioned for her to move, Serena's body reacted instinctively. She stood tall, her back straight, her chin lifted with quiet defiance. The humiliation stung, but she would not allow herself to crumble. Not now, not here, and certainly not in front of these people. There were no words of protest, no desperate pleas for understanding. She had worked too hard to get where she was, to let one moment of disrespect knock her down. The officers didn't speak to her as they guided her through the lobby, their silence amplifying the absurdity of the entire situation. They treated her like just another unruly guest, a person who had overstayed her welcome, whose presence had become an inconvenience. Serena walked with them, each step an exercise in restraint, each breath a deliberate act of control. Her mind was already working, calculating, planning, and simmering with frustration. As they approached the exit, Serena's eyes scanned the lobby one last time. The receptionist, still sitting at her desk, was avoiding her gaze. The staff members who had been chatting and laughing moments before now stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. But no one intervened. No one offered an apology. It was as though the entire hotel had conspired to erase her existence in that moment, to pretend she was just another customer to be handled and discarded. The door opened with a soft swish as the officers escorted her outside, and the cool evening air hit her face. The sudden shift from the warmth of the hotel to the chill of the street was jarring. Serena paused for a brief second, letting the reality of the situation settle in. She had been ousted from her own property, a place she had nurtured from the ground up. But she wasn't going to let this moment define her. She didn't flinch. She didn't let the emotion of the moment show. Her heart was racing, her body tense, But on the outside, she appeared composed, as though she had done this 1,000 times before. She stepped away from the officers, who stood quietly by, still not speaking, still not offering an explanation. With measured steps, she walked toward her car, the sound of her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her car, parked just a few yards away, loomed in the distance like a symbol of her autonomy. She reached the door and slid into the driver's seat, the weight of what had just happened sinking into her bones. But even as she sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, she didn't let herself indulge in the anger or the humiliation. She looked out the windshield, staring into the quiet street, her thoughts racing. This isn't just about today. This is about everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed. Serena had spent years carving out her position in an industry that often underestimated her. First for her gender, then for the color of her skin, and now, apparently, for her position as CEO. Every step had been hard-earned. Every victory had been a battle. But as the officer's car pulled away and the hotel disappeared from view, the fire in Serena's eyes burned brighter than ever. They will regret this, she thought, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. The sharp sting of injustice was still there, still fresh, but it was fueling something inside her, something that had been dormant for far too long. Serena wasn't about to let this pass. She was done being passive, done letting people assume they could disrespect her without consequence. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper problem, a problem with the very heart of her hotel. She was the CEO, and if anyone was going to ensure her vision for excellence was upheld, it would be her. Her thoughts shifted back to the employees inside, the ones who had ignored her, the ones who had failed to do their jobs. They think this is over, she mused. They think they've won. But I'll make sure they understand that disrespect is never the answer. The engine of Serena James's car purred softly as she sat in the driver's seat, still gripping the steering wheel, her mind racing. The world outside seemed distant, fading into the blur of city lights as she processed everything that had just happened. Her hotel, her creation, her legacy, had just turned against her. The humiliation stung, but it was the betrayal that cut deeper. She had spent years building this empire, only to be tossed aside by the very people she had entrusted to uphold her standards. This was no longer just a minor inconvenience. It was an assault on everything she stood for. Her thoughts were a storm, an unrelenting tide of anger and disbelief. But even as the frustration roiled within her, Serena's mind stayed sharp. This isn't over, she told herself, gripping the phone in her hand. The car's air conditioning hummed in the background, but to Serena, everything was suffocating. She had to act. She couldn't afford to let this slide. The consequences of this failure ran deeper than just poor service. It was a direct challenge to her leadership, her reputation, and her authority. She reached for her phone with purpose, dialing the number she knew by heart. It rang once, twice, before the line clicked. The voice on the other end was familiar, calm, and professional, exactly what Serena needed right now. "Good evening, Serena," said Jonathan, her HR director. "What can I do for you?" Serena took a deep breath, forcing the calm into her voice. She knew what she had to do. There was no room for hesitation, no time for emotional outbursts. This was a moment for leadership, for decisive action. The entire chain of command needed to understand that this was not just a misstep. It was a fundamental failure of respect and responsibility. Serena wasn't just angry. She was resolute. "Fire them all," Serena said, her voice cold and unwavering. The words were sharp, crisp, and final. They carried the weight of her authority, her resolve, and her commitment to the values she had built her company on. There was no need for further explanation. Serena had seen enough, too much, in fact. She wasn't going to waste time on idle words or discussions. She had given them the opportunity to prove themselves, and they had failed miserably. Jonathan paused on the other end, a brief moment of silence hanging in the air. Serena could almost hear him processing the gravity of her request. She had worked with Jonathan long enough to know that he respected her judgment, but even he had to understand just how significant this moment was. "Serena, are you sure about this?" Jonathan asked, his voice betraying a hint of surprise. Serena's fingers tightened around the phone, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm sure. This goes beyond a mistake. This is about the integrity of our brand and the way we do business. If we allow this to slide, We're sending the wrong message to every employee, every guest, and every competitor. There's no room for complacency here. Not now. Not ever. She paused for a moment, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, watching as the hotel's towering structure faded from view in the distance. It felt like a part of her was being left behind, something irreparably broken. But she couldn't afford to dwell on that. The damage was done, and now it was time for her to repair it. Swiftly and decisively. You understand, Serena continued, her tone hardening. We're not just dealing with a few bad apples. This is a systemic issue. If we let it continue, we risk everything we've worked for. I've built this company on excellence, and I won't allow anyone to undermine that. Jonathan was silent for a moment, clearly weighing her words. Serena could sense the wheels turning on the other end of the line. He had been with her since the early days of the hotel chain, and he understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about firing a few employees. It was about reasserting control, about showing everyone that Serena James didn't tolerate failure, no matter who was involved. Finally, Jonathan spoke, his voice steady but tinged with caution. I'll make it happen, Serena. But I need you to know, this will be a huge move. There are a lot of people who are going to be affected by this. I know, Serena replied, her gaze narrowing as she focused on the road ahead. But this is bigger than anyone's personal situation. This is about the future of the brand. If we don't take a stand now, it'll be too late. Jonathan sighed, a long, resigned breath on the other end. Serena could tell he didn't like what was happening, but he also knew better than to question her resolve. Understood, he said. I'll take care of it immediately. As Serena ended the call, a heavy weight seemed to lift off her shoulders. She wasn't relieved, not yet. But there was a sense of finality in the decision, a moment where she had taken control and made a move that could not be undone. She had given the staff a chance they had squandered. Now, the consequences would be felt, and Serena was going to make sure they were felt deeply. Her grip on the wheel tightened once again, the muscles in her arms flexing with resolve. She wasn't done with the hotel, not by a long shot, but this moment had set the stage for what was to come. Serena James wasn't just a CEO. She was a force, and those who underestimated her would soon learn just how wrong they were. She drove through the streets, the city lights flashing by in a blur, her mind already planning the next steps. She would rebuild, yes, but not without first making sure that every single person who had betrayed her would know the cost of their actions. They would know what it meant to cross Serena James. They would know what it meant to disrespect the very standards she had set. Her heart burned with determination, her eyes locked on the future. The fire that had been ignited by the earlier humiliation had transformed into a focused, unrelenting resolve. She would not allow this to be the defining moment of her career. No, this was just the beginning of a new chapter. And in that chapter, Serena James would show the world what true leadership looked like. The news traveled fast. Word spread like wildfire through the hotel, reaching every corner of the property in mere minutes. A hush descended over the once bustling building as the magnitude of what had just happened began to settle in. The entire staff had been fired, every last one of them. Serena James, the woman who had built this hotel empire from the ground up, had made her decision, and there was no turning back. The air inside the hotel felt different now, heavy, thick with uncertainty. It was as if the soul of the place had been ripped out, leaving a hollow echo in its wake. The usual hum of activity was replaced by an eerie silence. The lobby, which had once been a vibrant space filled with guests checking in, staff attending to their needs, and the soft murmur of polite conversation, now stood still, almost ghostly. Only a few employees remained, those few who hadn't yet packed their things, still too stunned to move. Most were still trying to process what had just happened. Some had heard about the firings as soon as it happened, while others only discovered the truth when they were summoned to the HR office or found their access badges suddenly revoked. The reality of Serena's decision was overwhelming. This wasn't just an abrupt change. It was a seismic shift, and they were all caught in the aftershock. Confusion rippled through the few employees who were left. They gathered in small, hesitant groups, their voices low and filled with disbelief. How could this happen? What went wrong? Why didn't we see this coming? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as employees who had worked side by side for years now stood apart, unsure of what had just unraveled so quickly. The ones who had been fired, the ones who had seen their livelihoods slip away, were angry, but not in the way one might expect. Their anger wasn't just directed at Serena, the woman who had made the call, but at themselves. How could they have been so careless? How could they have let things slide to the point where such a decision had to be made? The ones who had stayed behind, those who had not been dismissed, felt equally shaken. They had been witness to the chain of events, to the unraveling of the hotel's operations. For those who had believed that complacency would be tolerated, who had assumed that their positions were untouchable, the sudden shift felt like a punch to the gut. They realized, perhaps too late, that there were no guarantees. No one, no matter how long they'd been with the company, was safe from the consequences of their actions. In the hallways, the silence was thick. Employees shuffled around, going through the motions, unable to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation. The management offices stood empty, devoid of the once familiar figures who had walked around with the confidence of those who believed they were indispensable. Now, the building felt hollow, like a machine with too many broken parts. The atmosphere inside the hotel was so thick with tension that it was palpable. The few employees still milling around felt as though they were walking on eggshells, unsure if the next step would get them into trouble. What could they do? How could they proceed with business as usual when the foundation of everything they had known was crumbling? But it wasn't just the people who had been let go who were affected. The shockwaves from Serena's decision reached deep into the very core of the hotel. The service, once impeccable, was now slipping further. The personal connections and care that had made the hotel special were now fading, replaced by the looming uncertainty of what would come next. As the day wore on, the full weight of Serena's message began to sink in. It wasn't just a punishment. It was a lesson in accountability, in responsibility, and in respect. The staff that had taken their roles for granted, the ones who had assumed they could get away with neglecting their duties, were now facing the consequences of their actions. There would be no more second chances, no more excuses. For the employees who had survived the cut, the truth was undeniable. This was no ordinary workplace. This was Serena James's empire, built on the bedrock of excellence. And Serena was a woman who demanded that her standards be met, no matter the cost. The lesson had been sent loud and clear. There was no room for complacency, no tolerance for mediocrity. Serena had shown them that much. Whether they liked it or not, they would all be held accountable for their actions. The ones who had been let go were the ones who had failed to meet the high expectations that Serena had set, but the ones who remained were no better off. The scrutiny would be on them now, and they would be expected to rise to the occasion. For the hotel's future, the path ahead was unclear. Would the remaining employees be able to step up to the challenge? Would the hotel be able to recover from the shock? No one knew. But one thing was certain. Serena James had left her mark. The hotel would not forget this day, not for a long time. The ripple effect of Serena's decision would continue to reverberate throughout the company, through the industry, and into the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed it. Her message was simple, yet powerful. Respect and accountability are non-negotiable. As the hours passed, the hotel's remaining employees knew that things would never be the same. Serena had made it clear that the bar had been set high, and anyone who didn't measure up would face the consequences. The fear of failure, of falling short of the expectations, was now ingrained in the hearts of the staff, whether they liked it or not. They had seen what happened when someone faltered. They had seen the power of Serena's leadership, the unyielding resolve she possessed to uphold the integrity of her brand. And as they carried on with the day, trying to pick up the pieces, one thing was certain. No one would ever forget the day Serena James had made her stand. And no one would dare underestimate her again. The drive home was quiet, almost serene. The soft hum of the car engine seemed to mirror Serena James's calm demeanor, her mind processing the whirlwind of the day. She had made a decision, a difficult, painful decision, but it was the right one. The weight that had hung over her in the moments following the firings had lifted as she distanced herself from the hotel, and now, as the city lights blurred past, she found herself at peace. The quiet of the night allowed her to reflect, to digest the magnitude of what had transpired. Her fingers rested on the steering wheel, and for the first time in hours, she let out a long, steady breath. The tension that had gripped her all day melted away, leaving behind a sense of calm certainty. Serena had always known that leadership came with its share of hard choices, but this was different. This wasn't about firing employees. It was about standing firm in her commitment to excellence. It was about setting a standard so high that it would make even the most complacent think twice. As she pulled into her driveway and parked the car, Serena sat for a moment, allowing herself to fully absorb the gravity of her actions. Her home, her sanctuary, was quiet. She stepped out of the car, looking up at the darkened sky. The stars seemed to shine just a little brighter tonight, as if the universe itself was acknowledging her strength. Leadership, she knew, wasn't just about the high points. It wasn't about the accolades or the moments of praise. It was about the choices no one saw, the decisions made behind closed doors that shaped the future. It was about holding the people around you to the highest possible standard, demanding excellence in everything they did. Serena didn't build her empire by settling for mediocrity, and she wasn't about to start now. Inside her home, the familiar comfort of her surroundings enveloped her. She walked through the hallway, her footsteps echoing softly in the empty space. The house felt different tonight, quieter, as though it, too, was waiting for the dust to settle, for the new chapter to begin. Serena stood in front of the large window that looked out over the city, the lights below twinkling like scattered jewels in the darkness. Her mind wandered back to the faces of the employees she had dismissed, the ones who had failed her. She thought about the quiet indifference that had marked their behavior that morning. They had taken their roles for granted, believing that nothing would ever change, that the high standards she had set were just words. But Serena had shown them the truth. No one, no matter how long they had been with the company, was immune to accountability. She wasn't cruel, she was firm. She had given them chances, opportunities to rise to the occasion, but they had squandered them. She had given them respect, but they had failed to return it. And in her world, that was unacceptable. Serena had built her brand on a foundation of trust, respect, and integrity, and she would not allow anyone to undermine that. The reality of leadership had never been lost on her. She knew it wasn't easy. It wasn't supposed to be. If it were, anyone could do it. But it was her unwavering commitment to the people she led and the standards she upheld that made her a true leader. Leadership wasn't about being liked. It was about doing what was right, even when it was hard. Even when it meant making decisions that would be unpopular. Serena wasn't interested in pleasing people. She was interested in pushing them to be their best, to achieve what they were truly capable of. As the hours passed, Serena reflected on the larger picture. Yes, the firings were a necessary step, but they were also a turning point. She had made her point clear, not just to the employees she had dismissed, but to everyone who worked under her. The message was simple, but powerful. Mediocrity would not be tolerated. It was a message that would resonate far beyond the walls of the hotel. The world Serena led was one where complacency had no place. She had spent too many years fighting against the odds, building something from the ground up, to allow the standards she had set to slip. Mediocrity, laziness, and entitlement had no room in her company. She expected and demanded the best from every single person who walked through those doors. And Serena was determined to lead by example. As she sat at her desk, her laptop open in front of her, Serena's thoughts began to shift toward the future. The hotel chain would recover, stronger than ever. This was just a setback, a momentary disruption in the grand scheme of things. Serena had built her empire on resilience, and now it was time to rebuild. The foundation had always been solid, and now it would be reinforced with the lessons learned from today. Her former employees, the ones who had taken their jobs for granted, would feel the impact of their actions long after they left. It wouldn't be easy for them to find new work, not in this industry, not after the scandal of being fired by one of the most respected CEOs in the business. Serena didn't enjoy their suffering, but she knew it was a necessary lesson. People needed to understand that there were consequences for their actions, and no one was above the standards she set. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on her lap. The quiet hum of the house surrounded her, a calmness that she hadn't fully appreciated before. Serena's heart felt steady now, more grounded than it had in hours. The weight of the day had been heavy, but she knew she had done the right thing. She had taken a stand, for herself, for her company, and for the people who would continue to work alongside her. Tomorrow would be a new day, and with it would come new challenges. But Serena was ready. She was ready to lead her company to even greater heights, ready to turn the page and begin the next chapter of her journey. She would make sure that the people who worked for her knew what it meant to be part of something extraordinary. They would understand that there was no room for complacency, no place for anyone who wasn't willing to give their best. In Serena's world, leadership wasn't about success alone. It was about creating an environment where everyone could thrive, but only if they earned it. It was about demanding excellence, holding people to the highest standard, and never, ever settling for less than the best. As she turned off her desk lamp and stood up, Serena felt the weight of the future in her hands, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to smile. Tomorrow, the work would continue, and Serena James would be leading the charge. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories coming your way. Drop your thoughts in the comments about what you feel about this story, and rate the story on a scale of 1 to 10. Also, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far our stories reach all over the world. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.